Species. Unite.
50% of clothing that gets created ends up in a landfill in the first year. So like when we're using way too much resource in the first place, the fact that half of that is going like directly to landfill in the first year is insane. And then what actually makes it into our closets, we wear about 20% of on like a trailing 12-month basis. So if you think about just the actual amount of utility that we get out of this massive system is insane. And that's just kind of like the waste part of it.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Novogratz. This is Species Unite. We have a favor to ask. If you like today's episode and you have a spare minute, could you please rate and review Species Unite on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts? It really helps people to find the show. This conversation is with Vanessa Barboni Hallik. Vanessa is the founder and CEO of Another Tomorrow. Another Tomorrow is doing fashion differently. Not only is it stunning, just a stunning brand, everything they do is truly sustainable. If other brands would follow Another Tomorrow's lead, we could really be solving some of these enormous problems within the fashion industry. Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Beth.
It's awesome to see you and have you here today. Thank you.
It is such a huge pleasure to be here.
It is. Yeah, we've been wanting to do this for a while and we haven't. But
here we are.
So we're going to get to Another Tomorrow, but I want to get to how you got to Another Tomorrow because it wasn't a straight road. I mean, you didn't come from fashion and you're changing the whole face of fashion. It's not like you just decided, hey, I'm going to get into fashion. You decided, oh, I'm going to do fashion and I'm going to do it totally differently. And so let's go way back and kind of set the stage.
Way back to Iowa?
Yes, let's go to Iowa.
We'll go way back to Iowa. So, we're sitting here in New York where I've lived for 21 years, which is crazy to say, but it's true. But I am originally an Iowa gal by virtue of the fact that my dad's first teaching job was at Grinnell College. So I had this really amazing upbringing that I totally didn't appreciate at the time. So my dad was a professor, an early technologist. My mom was an artist. So I love this kind of idea of like interdisciplinary problem solving. If you haven't been to Grinnell, and you probably don't have many reasons to go to Grinnell, but it's kind of like academic adult summer camp in the cornfields, or at least that's what I remember.
Where in Iowa is this?
It's a teeny tiny town of about 3,000 people, about an hour from Des Moines. Yeah. So started out there, but my childhood took me through basically like Midwest Rust Belt. And so the biggest chunk of my time I actually spent in northwestern Pennsylvania. The reason that that's relevant to the journey is that I basically saw like all the negative externalities of capitalism like in my backyard. So it was like environmental disaster in the Great Lakes region, the town that I grew up in there, Meadville, Pennsylvania. So many of the high-paying, blue-collar tool and die jobs left in the late 80s and early 90s, and just saw the social fabric of that town get torn. So between the time that I went to high school and my sister went to high school, that was 3 years between us, they installed metal detectors. I mean, drug rates went up massively, crime rates went up massively. The town today is like really not that recognizable relative to the way I personally grew up. I was just like kind of steeped in the idea that this there's got to be a better way. Like these are not the outcomes that we're going for. So long story short, you take that coupled with like interdisciplinary problem solving. And I kind of had this like solution oriented mindset to how the world could look going forward. So I thought that one cool job on paper was architecture. I went out to Berkeley thinking maybe I was going to do that. Ended up, my mom passed my freshman year of college, and I did this kind of subliminal pivot, just like towards safety, towards something a little bit more known. Spoke with some practicing architects during that time, and I also had a few different ideas about that profession. But long story short, I ended up in finance, which is what took me to New York. And I thought banks were tellers with like the little tube that comes through the drive-through. I mean, like legit, that's what I thought a bank was. I did not know that like investment banking was a thing, but I'd written a paper in college, co-authored a paper in college on electricity pricing. So the banks were like, oh, girl who does math, like great. So there I was in finance, made my way into emerging markets, which I thought was really fascinating, but I didn't forget where I came from. And I was forever trying to figure out how was I going to bring that into my day job? And it was, 2003. It was really nascent. We weren't talking about sustainable investing in the same way. So it was a total pain in the neck, I think, to manage. I know. Now that I've been gone for a while, people really tell me the truth. Left in 2007 to do a degree in energy and environmental policy, and then stayed, ended up back there. Long story short, they said that I could do both, and I ended up taking a sabbatical. And that was how I fell down the rabbit hole of the scourge of the earth that is our fashion system.
Were you interested in fashion?
Yes and no. I think that it was one of the few areas of like personal expression for me, like outlet of creativity in a very linear job. So now that I've left, I've gotten like a lot more commentary about my historical fashion choices, which were apparently bolder than average on the trading floor.
Right.
But I knew one person. I knew one person in the whole industry. And I think, and this is something that I struggled with, I spent so much time and energy trying to prove myself in that industry that the idea that if you had ever told me that I would go into fashion, I'd be like, you have to be out of your mind.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way.
That's why I asked, because fashion's so hard.
It's hard, and it's got a bad rap. It's got a bad rap for being this kind of like fluffy industry that is super materialistic and surface level, which I think contributes to the fact that a lot of serious people aren't focused on solving this problem. And that is something that is part of my mission to solve.
Everybody at this point knows that fashion's bad for the planet.
Yeah.
And in the big picture, it's not just bad for the planet, it's bad for the animals, it's bad for people. And it's one of the big things that is completely destroying the planet.
Truly.
But we're going to take it apart a little bit, because it's an easy thing to say like, oh yeah, fashion's terrible, but everybody buys clothes. Most people buy too many clothes. People love clothes on sale. And so even though there's an awareness around fashion, let's just start with taking it apart a little bit. Like when I say fashion is really bad for the planet.
Yeah.
Break that down a little bit in kind of all the ways.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, and I think that it's so complex, and that I think is one of the reasons why it's hard to wrap your head around. So a few of the things that really kind of stopped me in my tracks. So one, and this is an industry that's arguably operating at like 4 times our planetary boundary. So like we are just like way in excess of what this planet can handle. 50% of clothing that gets created ends up in a landfill in the first year. And then what actually makes it into our closets, we wear about 20% of on like a trailing 12-month basis. So if you think about just the actual amount of utility that we get out of this massive system is insane. And that's just kind of like the waste part of it. And the way that things actually end up in landfill, I think is also something that a lot of people don't think about, right? It's like there's this idea that, you donate clothes and like it ends up in some great hands. Well, the reality is there's an underbelly of that system too that is part of what like gets things to the Atacama Desert and Ghana, et cetera, these piles of clothes that you can literally see from space. That's, some of the waste portion of it. And then there's, the fact that there are these myriad impacts on climate, on biodiversity, on water, all the way up the processing chain. So a huge portion of it comes at the raw material level. So people don't think about fashion as an agricultural product, but it is. It's either an agricultural product or it's made out of plastic. And when it's an agricultural product, all the same issues that you think, or many of the same issues that are endemic to food systems are also endemic to fashion systems. And so you've got things like, cotton, which is, I think, somewhere on the order of 2-3% of like total crop production, and one of the biggest users of chemical insecticides and pesticides, some of which are incredibly harmful to ecosystems and human health. So that's just cotton. Uses huge amounts of water for irrigation. You've got issues in the way that the processing takes place. So you've got hugely energy intensive processing situations. And you've got chemicals that end up in waterways and microfibers that end up in waterways. So it's like you've got raw materials, you've got the way that those raw materials are processed, and then you've got the way that finished goods are actually created, and then how they're ultimately worn and disposed of. So it's the whole thing is a mess, and it's really underregulated.
Well, there's kind of no rules.
Very few rules. Very, very, very few rules. And the fact that the system is so risk laden that it creates this huge drive toward enormous profit margins. I mean, actually many, many multiples of like food margins, for example, huge profit margins, gross margins at least, forcing, lowest cost. And then you've got these countries that are basically competing on lowest cost. And so you've got governments who want to keep people employed. And so many times it's actually not in their interest to allow for regulation that would make it more costly to do business there. And that's been part of the problem.
The whole industry somehow been able to get away with this. Like there's a lot more awareness now.
Yes.
But even like 20 years ago, nobody was really aware of what workers were paid.
Yeah.
And how it's not far from indentured servitude, like a lot of what workers are paid. People weren't aware of what it's doing to the planet. People just kind of thought clothes came. I mean, I did, I think, too. Like they just showed up, right? Like
totally.
All the damage they caused along the way. So when you said, okay, look, this is a problem I want to go after, tell me the steps to this, because that's like an insurmountable. I mean, it's enormous.
No, it's enormous. And, and I definitely didn't have this like immediate light bulb to say, oh my gosh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to radically change my career. But I started to pull on the thread because I came into this really trying to look at all of the major industries and understand their like negative externalities. And so I was just pulling on the thread while simultaneously saying, oh, okay, I'm just going to try and, buy better myself. And it was when I saw that it was so incredibly difficult to do that. And I looked at the fashion ecosystem and thought, oh my, this is an industry that doesn't have a vision for its own future. And brands didn't have a vision for their own futures. And, to the extent that people were doing things sustainably, a lot of it was applying somewhat better sourcing to a fundamentally broken model. And so I just got really curious about that and thought, well, what would another model look like? And so, really started Another Tomorrow as like because brands are a manifestation of the system. So like, how can Another Tomorrow be a manifestation of the future of fashion? And, really kind of started from the very beginning. And then I did a ton of research around what had failed. And so I now call that like graveyard diligence, because I wanted to know, okay, I wasn't the first person who was really motivated by this. So who came before me or simultaneously, and why had those solutions either failed to scale or failed outright? And what I found was there was this desire for the customer to be so much better educated than they are.
Right.
So much more willing to prioritize sustainability at first purchase, and willing to kind of have a tolerance for sort of like just okay product. And potentially willing to pay more. And that was like an equation that just fundamentally doesn't scale. And you might get a few really enthusiastic people at the beginning, which is actually a really bad signal sometimes, because like, you're really early enthusiasts. If they do not mirror the bigger market opportunity, you may not attract any other customers.
Well, in the same sense with food, like if you look at like alternative proteins, you don't really want the vegans because they're already in, right?
They're already in.
And so their taste buds are way bigger. They
Yes,
have much more room for, you want all the other things to win.
Absolutely. And that was crucial, that we were like, okay, we're going to meet that like conventional customer where they are. And we're going to deliver something of value to them today. And then we're going to like bring them in, And we also, I don't fundamentally believe that like the consumer is going to be what saves this industry, right? Like there's so much regulation that's required, but we also wanted to be a model to the industry that like this can work and this can scale and this can work, commercially.
What about in the customer sense? Are people starting to demand more sustainable fashion now, or is it still a big mountain?
It's a mixed bag, and I think part of the problem is the paucity of options. like it's hard to actually prioritize it in your shopping behavior if there's almost nothing on the market.
Yeah.
And so it almost is not even top of mind because there are no options. I think where that differs are in two categories. One, in the outdoor space, you've got way more traction. I mean, Patagonia being an obvious leader, but they have many more peers at this point that I think are really exciting. And then in secondhand. So I think that is what's happening in the secondhand space is really, really exciting. And that's also makes sense because it's one of the few ways where you can make the more sustainable choice and it's also less expensive. So we're seeing a real tailwind. And it's also simplifies it, right? It's like so much more intuitive. It's like, oh, this is not a new thing. I can buy this thing that is not new. That's a good thing, right? So that I think has also simpler and cheaper for the customer tends to win.
And it's people are really starting, especially younger people.
Oh yeah,
are
like buy something secondhand first.
Yeah. So let's go through like cotton. So you obviously have to have cotton you have to work with cotton.
Yes.
And like you said, cotton's a mess. So how do you even begin?
Well, it's funny, farm level traceability has become like our North Star. And it happened, I mean, it's sort of ironic given like where I come from. So it sort of makes sense. But, it happened because I started asking questions behind the certifications of like, well, tell me like specifically what like the farm practices and like, where is this from? And like, does it make sense in that local context? We basically have focused on organic because really, and people argue about organic is like, does it use more water, less water? I mean, putting that aside, it uses a hell of a lot less really problematic chemicals. So it's organic. We've developed relationships. In this case, the cotton market's a big market. We need like a consortium. So we go through an Italian mill that can provide us basically organic cotton that is farm traceable to a portfolio of certified farms in countries with really strong governance standards around certification, because that's been another big issue is just the falsification of organic cotton certification. And it's about 1% of the market.
The like falsifications and
it's particularly prominent in cotton, I think in part because it's grown so many places and many of those places are not known for governance and don't have the kind of government support for governance.
And so this is how you source all your materials that you like.
This is our North Star. And, I would say the vast majority of our organic cotton, we have farm level traceability. We have some where we only have traceability to country of origin with certifications. And you're always kind of trying to bring that up, bring that up the like ladder of improvement, let's say. Other things like, viscose, people don't know, like what is, I don't know what viscose is.
I don't know.
It's made out of cellulose. It's a man-made cellulosic fiber. And the cool thing about viscose, and there aren't many cool things about viscose, but one of them is that you can make it from lots of different kinds of cellulose. In the vast majority of cases, it comes from wood pulp. And then wood pulp has to be forested. And so how it's harvested really matters. So then it becomes about forestry management. But because of the way that forests are managed responsibly, you don't go and just like chop down a forest. Like you're doing these like thinning processes, et cetera. But that means that you're never like in one, just in one place. So this idea of like farm level traceability doesn't really exist in that particular market. And then the big onus for us is how do you replace those virgin inputs with recycled inputs? So there's a lot of really cool stuff happening in that
And
space.
how do you do that?
There's a lot of material science innovation around that. So there are some great companies out there doing that work. Circ is one of them. Evernew is another one. So there are a bunch of companies that are really focused on that piece of things. And it's a huge source of deforestation. So if anybody wants any information on that, there's an incredible NGO called Canopy based in Vancouver that does incredible work around improving the viscose supply chains globally.
So like a lot of viscose is you're killing forest.
Yeah, ancient and endangered forests. Yeah, not great.
I should have known what viscose was.
That's like, but like people don't talk about this.
Right.
It's like it's not a thing.
Wow. We can't get the future stuff fast enough.
We can't get the future stuff fast enough. Yeah.
So that part of your process then is you're like, okay, we're only sourcing from places that are doing good things.
Yes.
To and for the planet.
Yes.
Talk about the QR codes, because that I think might be the coolest thing about Another Tomorrow.
Oh, that was like the best decision I think we've ever made. And so, this is such a Luddite industry. Like the adoption of technology is just like embarrassing. And a lot of it can be deployed in really, really easy ways. And so we understood from the very get-go that we wanted to be able to expose our process to our customers and create that level of transparency. And the reality is like, this jacket that we make today could have a slightly different supply chain than the same jacket next year. So we created a unique digital ID for every single item we've ever made from the very beginning. And the first use case was, to be able to scan the code and see the whole supply chain. I would love to tell you that everyone does that.
Everyone should do that.
Everyone should.
That should be. It should be a law.
Totally, and it's like taking farm to table to farm to closet.
Right.
So, which is
and it's like
amazing.
knowing what you're eating. It's knowing what you're wearing.
Knowing what you're wearing.
Knowing what viscose is.
Knowing what viscose is. Right. That was a great way for us to take like our North Star and connect it back to the customer and create a sense of connection again with like where your clothes come from. But we also realized from the get-go that we wanted to give our customers the heads up that we were going to support the product in resale. We didn't launch that right off the bat, but we wanted people to know that we were going to. And so we now leverage this for our authenticated resale program. So you can, when you're, let's say that your body size changes, we actually have a size exchange program. So that works for that. But let's say, after a few years, you've moved on for whatever reason, style, body, taste, whatever, you can scan it. You put in the product's quality, you'll know exactly what you get back.
But you sell it back to you?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So you know exactly what you'll get, which is a lot more than most marketplaces would offer you. You get a shipping label, you send it straight back to us. If we agree with the quality and the authenticity of the item, you get your store credit right away. We have a cash option also that's kind of waiting in the wings. But it's basically this digitalization has created this kind of like scaffolding for the business for us to be able to do all these cool things.
I mean, that is, again, another thing that everyone should be doing.
Everyone should be doing.
Like, this is how the world should work.
100%. And that's why we're doing it, right? It's like, these are things that other companies can do. Right. And sometimes they don't even know that they can do them.
Right. And is it that hard? It's not that hard to
It's not that
put a
hard.
QR code on.
You just have to, the hard part is you really need to know your supply chain in the first place, right? And have a confidence level in exposing that. The QR code piece, it takes operations and a commitment to doing it.
But if there were a demand, because I think once people got used to saying if they're wearing a lot of another tomorrow, right? You would kind of want that on everything you buy.
Ideally. Yeah, ideally you just want to shift the standards.
Yeah.
And European regulation is also moving in this direction around digital product passports and this idea of product level traceability. So I think that we're trying to raise the bar, and there are a couple other interesting folks doing things in this space. And then, we're seeing this tailwind of regulation that I think is really going to be the forcing mechanism.
Well, it's starting in the EU, but it's the same clothes, so it's going to have to happen here too.
Well, right. And that's been the beautiful thing is I think that I was more worried at the beginning that in the absence of regulation outside the EU that we weren't going to see that much traction. But there's such a forcing mechanism by virtue of what they're doing, which is really exciting. And there's some really cool stuff happening here. On the labor side, we're one of the supporters for SB 62, which outlawed piece rate work in California. But now there's the Fabric Act, the Fashion Act.
Go back to the first one. What's piece rate work?
Oh, so piece rate work is literally paying the garment worker by the piece. And what that was leading to is garment workers in California, in many cases, their take-home pay would be less than the minimum wage even. So forget about living wage, below even the minimum wage. And so that was really important to get rid of. And that was, I think, getting that passed. You saw some beautiful, unsurprisingly, beautiful spillover effects like California and New York. And then now we're starting to see this more imaginative legislation, which is exciting.
And do you think regulations in terms of materials are going to change in the US too?
I think slowly but surely. It starts with transparency, and it starts with, I think, like producer responsibility at the outset. And then, we need so much more regulation on the material side. And it's happening in idiosyncratic ways. Like one of the worst chemicals used on cotton, not organic cotton, regular cotton is called chlorpyrifos. And like we've seen also legislative action on that. So there's stuff that's happening in like very scientifically specific ways also.
Right.
But we need so much more
But
regulation.
like for big brands, are they wanting, I mean, are they resisting change? Are they wanting change?
I think there's a lot happening behind the scenes. I mean, I think the fact that COVID was so disruptive from a supply chain standpoint has created just a lot more like business critical need to know your supply chain in ways that people were previously like just, close your eyes.
Right. No one really knew where they were getting
They really didn't. It's so many third party intermediaries and all of this. So and then once you need to know your supply chain and you know your supply chain, then it's like, oh shit. Like now I know my supply chain. I better.
But that's even like the customer knowing the supply chain. Once you know, like if I could see that my sweater was killing a forest, it definitely, I mean, now I know because I don't wear animal products. So I'm like very aware of labels for that. But never did it occur to me to think like, oh shit, I shouldn't wear viscose.
Or I should wear responsibly, or I should ask the question. Yeah.
And so it does make, I think, customers more curious. And then once we start realizing, oh, we have some say in this.
Definitely. And I always say, like, because it is complex and the level of awareness, the starting point is so low, the most powerful thing that customers can do is ask questions.
Right.
And so, people ask me, okay, if there's one question that I could ask, what should I ask? And I actually, even though the vast majority of the complexity of our supply chains and our focus is environmental, one of the cleanest things to initially ask is like, was the person who made this product paid a living wage? Because if the answer to that is yes, and that is unfortunately, I think, the stats vary anywhere between 2 and 10% of garment workers are paid a living wage. But that shows a pretty significant commitment right there. So if you can only ask one question, I ask that one.
That's a big one.
That's a big one.
And how is that still going on, that between 2 and 10% of garment workers are paid a living wage?
Part of it is just the vast underregulation of the industry. And part of it are the really unhealthy competitive labor dynamics in some places as well, where people are trying to protect lowest cost. But the underregulation is a huge one. And the lack of brand level accountability for that, because so much of production is subcontracted, is a huge issue, huge issue. Because the brands are able to say, well, I have a code of conduct.
Right. We pay our people.
We pay our people, and we have a code of conduct for our suppliers.
Right.
But beyond that code of conduct, where does that responsibility lie?
Wow.
It's a challenge.
It's a big challenge.
Yeah, huge.
And is that on the label?
It's on our label. It's on our label. And, I think that there's so much complexity that we've got to figure out also, how do we synthesize this for customers without losing some of the really important nuance? And that's, I think, there's a lot of work that has to get done there.
Well, and it also has to be done in a way, like I love the way you do it now, because even though it's a lot of information, right?
It's there.
The word sustainable means nothing anymore. All these words mean nothing.
They mean nothing.
Organic means nothing. And so you can slap a label on and it's meaningless.
Yeah.
And so to actually explain it all is pretty meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right. There does need to be like actual real
some level of consolidation, and it's and we won't even go into some of the challenges of what's been done in that space, but at least if you could condense things down to like the human impact with some guarantee of fair wages, and that's actually true all the way up the supply chain. Because a lot of there's all kinds of stuff that happens at the farm level as well, which is a huge issue. But something that addresses the human issue, something that addresses the environmental impact, and something that addresses whether animals were harmed or killed in the process.
Well, and it's also, even if if it's not an animal product, right? If you just take a shirt and you're like, how many people actually were involved in the making of the shirt?
Totally.
It's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people who touch that product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when there's animals involved, it's a totally different story.
Yeah. And, even even in the case of cotton, some of these chemical insecticides and pesticides are like chemical bombs in the ecosystems in which it's grown. So it's really a big deal.
Are you now looking into like next gen leathers?
Very much so. So, our starting point was, and where we are today, is that we didn't want to use any fiber that required harming or killing the animal.
Yeah.
And so like obviously leather is out. And at the same time, we've wanted to avoid any of the plastic composites and wait kind of to the next generation that had no plastic composites and would also create a product that the customer would love, and to your point, not just the vegan customer,
right.
but the customer would love.
Right.
And I'm really excited that we're getting a heck of a lot closer to that. We are working with an amazing bio-based leather alternative from natural fiber welding, which we're super excited about. That is like the closest that we've found so far.
The material that you're working with from natural fiber welding is Mirum.
Yes, exactly.
And you're experimenting right now? Or?
We've been experimenting for years, and we've got something that we feel really good about.
Wow.
Yeah.
And is it going to be on the market?
Coming to a theater near you. I'll let you know. Not too far away.
A lot of these next-gen materials, they are so on the cusp of scaling.
Yeah.
Especially the zero plastic, super eco-friendly, like gorgeous, incredible next-gen materials for leather.
Yes.
Are like inches away from being out there in the world. And so it's cool as can be that you will be debuting one of them.
Yeah, we're so excited. I'm
really excited. And what else do we have to look forward to?
Well, I mean, we're really doubling down on circularity and regenerative agriculture.
Okay.
These are two areas that are huge ones for us, and areas where we feel like what we're doing can also be scaled on a broader basis. And so, we've been at our authenticated resale business for some time. We've seen some really interesting ways that we can evolve our technology to really enhance the scale of that. So that's an area of definite focus. Equally on the regenerative ag side, we've developed almost entirely custom materials because of our requirements.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're kind of getting like the bottom of the barrel. And so we've really developed custom materials, and we found that we're now in the early stages of potentially scaling some of those textile supply chains as well for others, which could be really cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And are other brands like knocking on your door saying, "How are you doing this? Are you getting?"
We have a wonderful relationship with a bunch of brands, and we try and take a very open sourced approach to what we do. Like I've got office hours, my creative director has office hours. We try and be very collaborative with other brands. So I think there's a nice dialogue happening. We get a particular number of inbounds from people who want to launch brands.
So, because it's much easier to start like you did from scratch.
Totally.
Change the system. And the system that's been going on for hundreds of years when it comes to a lot of these materials.
Totally.
Thousands.
Totally.
It's a very hard system to change.
It is. And it's a funky time in the industry. And it's a time when people are really, really focused on margin and cost. And so, we're still seeing some great signs of progress, but we're also seeing a lot of sensitivity to the economics. But for people who are creating new things in the world, we get a ton of inbounds, which is cool.
And very exciting.
Yeah, very exciting.
Well, Vanessa, I've learned a lot today. I didn't even...
Careful what you ask.
I'm going to be talking about this viscose thing all week.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, with such pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Such pleasure.
And where can people find Another Tomorrow?
Many places. Anothertomorrow.co online, on social channels at Another Tomorrow. But we also sell with many of our partners at Net-a-Porter, Bergdorf Goodman, Selfridges, Neiman Marcus, Saks Fifth Avenue, a bunch of amazing specialty stores. Yeah, many places. But yeah, we want to hear from you. So we'd love to get inbounds.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
This was great. To learn more about Vanessa and Another Tomorrow, go to our website, speciesunite.com. We will have links to everything. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Species Unite. If you have a spare moment and could do us a favor, please subscribe, rate, review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps people find the show. I would like to thank everyone at Species Unite, including Gary Knudsen, Caitlin Pierce, Amy Jones, Paul Healy, Santina Polkey-Link, Sam Kosel, and Anna Kalner, who wrote and performed today's music. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day.